Hello, this is Andy from Business Without Bullshit, and this is Steve Kuhn. Steve, you are a very complicated person.
That's true.
And you effectively, one of your main proponent theories, which I agree wholeheartedly with, is we're listening to economists too much in government and not enough on climate change.
Yeah.
Is do you find that we are traveling continually in the wrong direction?
Absolutely. I mean, economists are going to mislead us all the way through. They led us into the financial crisis back in 2007. And at least with the financial crisis, you can solve the problem with money to some extent. But they've also led us into a climate crisis, and I think it's going to be catastrophic. And they have no bloody idea what the climate is, and their advice has been encouraging us not to do anything, and we're about to pay the price for that.
And Steve is an economist, and we talk about a lot of things, including his new, groundbreaking software to analyze data. I mean, the man loves data. I'm going to say it your way just once. Yeah, there's a battle of how you say data. So yeah, check it out if you want to understand the world better. Hello and welcome to Business Without Bullshit. And today I am joined by the very fine Steve Kuhn. Steve is a fellow of UCL, a multi-author, Debunking Economics, the New Economics Manifesto, and a new book coming soon. We had the great honor of having him on the podcast previously and learned much, I would say, especially in terms of his at times rebellious views towards the common attitudes towards economics and what's going on in society. Steve, great to see you again.
Thank you for the invite. Most pleased to be back here again.
Steve, what is on Steve's mind these days as a man of many minds, I would say, or many thoughts?
Well, I don't know that I'd publish an article or a report for Carbon Tracker last time I was with you guys. I think it was before I finished writing it, and that was titled Loading the Dice Against Pensions, explaining how economists are destroying the financial futures of people that they should be trying to preserve instead. So that came out for Carbon Tracker, and taking on mainstream economists over how they analyse climate change. And that's really become almost the main focus of my life these days. But coincidentally, and this is quite crazy, for the last dozen years, I've been developing a commercial software package with the name of Ravel. And amazingly, you guys have timed it almost perfectly. It'll be coming out on the 1st of July. So in the middle of taking on economists for potentially destroying capitalism, I'm also trying to become a capitalist myself.
Those things aren't necessarily counterintuitive, are they? You're allowed to... I mean, your view is that economists are listened to too much and we're not listening enough about climate change. And economists sort of extrapolate the situation in a way that's like, oh, it's all going to be okay. And the money keeps going around. Whereas underneath it, you're illustrating major issues about climate that should be discussed maybe, and those people need to be listened to, which I think is a very sound point. Does that preclude you from being a capitalist?
Not at all, but I think it's likely to be my Murphy's Law that seems to have been out throughout my life. The old Murphy's Law, things that can go wrong will go wrong. Well, my interpretation of Murphy is that things happen out of sequence. If something happened, if B happened before A, you would never do A, that sort of thing. So I've got a feeling I've got a product which I think would be seriously worth in the billions. And the likely thing that happen is capitalism is going to collapse courtesy of mainstream economists before I make my first billion. So
well,
that's the ironic thing.
We've got two rather large roads to go down. Let's do the product first, because what is the product trying to solve? What's the problem it's trying to solve?
It's trying to get rid of spreadsheets.
Okay.
You must be a spreadsheet user.
I mean, I'm an accountant. Basically that is our world.
Okay. Well, you first of all, you can't read the formulas in your own spreadsheet because they're hidden behind the numbers the formulas generate. Okay, we've got used to that for 30 or 40 years.
Say that slowly. I mean, sometimes you write formulas, there's formulas in there, but
you can't see them because they're behind the results of the formulas.
Yeah, they're behind the results. You'd have to click in the cell.
That's right, and then you can see the formula. Then the formula itself is the sort of thing we used to write 40 years ago before we discovered object-oriented programming and so on. $sign B3 colon Z22.
Yeah, it's basic.
It's basic even without. It's basic was in English.
Yeah.
So it's basic without basic, which is pretty bad.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if there's a problem in the spreadsheet, how the hell can you audit it? Okay. Big issue is if you're an accountant, as you know.
You pay us to go through every cell.
Exactly.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
I want to ruin your job.
Yeah. Come and ruin it.
When I became an academic, and this is what led to my work in climate change and everything else as well, I was emphatic about the need to cover complexity. You couldn't think about capitalism as an equilibrium system. It was a complex system. And you had to cover dynamics. You had to have evolution as part of it. So I ended up organising a conference called Commerce, Complexity and Evolution back at the University of New South Wales in 1996. And one of the guys who came along to give a paper at the conference was Russell Standish. And Russell is my partner in Ravel. And he'd doing a PhD in physics at the university at the same time I was doing one in economics. And Russell didn't want to be a physicist. He wanted to model complex systems, evolution. So his PhD was on how do you mathematically model evolution. And then out of the blue, I popped with this email about the conference I'm running, and bang, he goes, there's somebody else at UNSW who's into complexity. And we met up and became firm friends. He, of course, being a physicist, got top-class mathematics, and also was doing his work in computational physics, so he could program, brilliantly in C++. He eventually became the director of the high-performance computing unit of both the University of New South Wales and the University of Sydney. So he went straight from a PhD to directing a high-performance computing unit, lots of staff and separate to the university, never really gave a lecture. And then out of the blue in about 2003, I think the universities decided to shut the centre down. So he was shafted, and he started his own consulting firm called High Performance Computing. And he's truly a genius. He's one of the most brilliant people I know. And ultimately, had to go and make his living in the market as a consultant, writing code for different programs. He wrote stuff for the RTA to handle an evolutionary algorithm for controlling traffic lights. So they would learn as time went on different streets and so on, that sort of thing. And then
it's a shame he didn't get that one out.
Well, he did, but
did he?
You need it in England. You need him here. Get him to London. He can fix up the code
Christ,
for you.
The traffic lights piss me off so much.
Yeah, I know. Well, this way they evolve and they learn.
It's when they break and then actually things work better that you think to yourself,
So anyway, that was what he was doing. And then out of the blue, when I was doing my non-orthodox economics, the Institute for Neoeconomic Thinking came into existence, founded by George Soros. Now, I was quite sceptical, so I didn't actually apply in the first year that they had the research funding. But in the first year, they funded a woman called Leanne Usher. And Leanne is a good friend of mine and does work in evolutionary economics. She actually built models of what she called zero intelligence traders. So like all the conventional economic stuff basically assumes you and I are Nostradamus. We can predict the future, equilibrium, blah, blah, blah. She said it's the structure of the market that determines how it behaves. You put zero intelligence traders in there, the market structure will generate the behaviour you see. And I thought, well, they found Leanne, they're likely to fund me. So I then applied for funding for building my software Minsky, which is the one I talked about last time I was here, and that's it's a dynamic system for modelling financial dynamics fundamentally. And economists who are supposed to be experts on money don't understand money. So I built the first software package that can model how money is created and distributed and so on. And then the University of Western Sydney returned the favour that Russell got. They tried to shut the economics department down.
Whoa.
Okay, so they made 5 of the 6 professors redundant, including me. And Russell and I were working on Minsky at the time, and I said, well, mate, let's do Ravel in our spare time. And so that's how this whole thing came about.
And do you see Ravel as a product that will be used by any business, even in the first iteration? Or?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the thing is, one of the hassles about using it is I use it, of course, for my analysis. And I'm doing economics all the time, so all my examples are economics. But it's fundamentally for handling any data at all. And when I first dreamt it up, I wasn't an academic. I was working in software reviews, and the company was mainly pitching itself for companies that want to analyse their marketing data.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you think with what's going on now with the AI, that you can sort of bolt together Excel and get the AI to write the formulas? And is it not all going to just sort of convalesce?
AI, I mean, I think the word artificial is the word we should emphasize when they say intelligence, because what they actually the mathematics behind it, what's called large language models, and they're enormous matrices.
That's the primary thing we're getting familiar with, anyway.
That's right. To me, we only have artificial intelligence when it's not AI intelligence, but AI imagination.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, and we're God knows how long we are from that. I'm skeptic about whether we'll actually get there. But you would have seen when the first, when the first enthusiasm for AI came out, it was going to wipe everything away. And there were certainly areas where I expect AI to completely change the industry. One of the most obvious ones to me is diagnosis, because no doctor can keep in their head all the various diseases that might generate the symptoms you have. But an AI can easily do that. And so you report the symptoms. It's going to come up with every possible disease that you might have had to generate that, and probably do a better initial diagnostic than doctors can do. So the things like that are going to work beautifully. But AI, you see the comments now about AI undergoing hallucinations?
No.
You haven't seen it? Well, because AI is, because it's a large language model, you train it on everything out there. And every last conspiracy theory and weird idea and stuff is going to turn up in its
you're
database.
meaning in terms of it making up things?
It's totally crazy. Yeah. So making citations for academic articles where the citation doesn't exist.
But in terms of your product for Ravel, I mean, we're sort of at a point now you could give a load of data to an AI and say, okay, give me X, give me the thing I want.
I think you'd find it's going to fail.
Okay.
Because again, you've got to structure the information. And like we certainly can add the AI capabilities to Ravel anytime we want to, because Russell has designed, dense neural networks, which is the fundamental idea behind large language models. So we could add that in as an extra element to the program, which we will do ultimately. But I think artificial intelligence is, for start, artificial. It's not intelligence. It's a language model. You won't have any. It won't necessarily work out the dimensions that matter. And the scale, the dimensionality is a huge issue for any organisation, because the more dimensions you add to a system, you hyper exponentially increase the complexity of the system you're looking at. So if you, one of my favourite examples and why dimensionality is an issue for reasoning is that economists think you utility maximise. That's one of the, why did the chicken cross the road? To maximise its utility. Why did it not cross the road? To maximise its utility. It's meaningless in many ways. But there was a brilliant experiment done to test the theory, where an economist, who's now ceased being an economist, I've since found out, ran a test where he wanted to show to his students that he could derive what economists call their indifference curves by actually looking at what their purchases were. So he gave them a test where you had 10 or 8 commodities that you could say you wanted to, what do you prefer, given different price structures. So he went through testing all the theory with different price ratios, changing income in different ways, testing out the theory itself. And the students completely violated the assumptions of rationality. Now, the reason they did was, if you have, say, 8 commodities and you can make a buy or not buy decision for those 8.
Based on what the price is, chocolate. Let's say it's chocolate.
They have things like video games and a cartoon and
and then you vary the price and you see whether they buy them or not.
Each time you add an extra dimension, you raise the complexity of the problem dramatically. So if you have 8 commodities and you want to make, let's say 2 commodities, and you want to make a choice between 0 units or 9 units of each. Well, that's 2 to the you've got 10 options there, 10 squared, there's 100 choices. When you add in 3, there's 1,000. When you add in 4, there's 10,000.
Right, your basic point, then whenever we analyse things from just with 2 dimensions, you haven't got any information.
Or the dimensions themselves overwhelm your reasoning capability. So unless you structure it in a dimensional way, you're not going to get the answer out of an AI. Now, Ravel structures it. And it's possible, because by structuring, you dramatically reduce the complexity of what you're looking at, and you can find clues you wouldn't find without dimension data.
Ravel structures it. So you can put the data in unstructured?
Yep. Well, it comes in CSV files at the moment.
So you upload a spreadsheet ultimately.
I'll upload a spreadsheet, and then you say, what are the dimensions I want to look at that matter? So like with the database from the Bank of International Settlements, is debt by country, by the sector that does the borrowing, by the date, and by whether you're looking at percentages of GDP or dollars or local currency. And then bang, you've got a 4-dimensional object.
So is it almost like a sort of better version of the graphical? I mean, some of the stuff you can do in terms of graph, it's more like, okay, give me the columns and the rows.
Yeah.
And then I will start graphically representing this from the start.
Yep.
Okay. And then your point on AI is that if you asked AI to order that data, I just find it quite an interesting thought that analyzing anything with 2 dimensions, boiling something down to a simplicity of what price you pay and whether or not you buy it is likely dumb, isn't it? I mean, decisions about purchasing something are
much more complex than that. And so what when you just dump it at a system and say, please work this out, it has to have some sort of algorithmic way of knowing what the hell you're asking it. And one of those algorithms is say, what are the dimensions of the data? So if you just AI has been thrown because what's called the curse of dimensionality will potentially overwhelm an AI. By putting the data in dimensional format in the first place, you give the AI a structure to work with. So we think AI could work as an adjunct to what we're doing with Ravel.
Could take that and then just use it as a way to present it, as it were. But businesses, the companies I know that tend to work in business intelligence and in that kind of sort of, it tends to be the big companies with lots of data have the problems. Is that who this is likely to be best for? Or, if I'm a very small company?
It'd be better for them because it's much more powerful and much faster.
Because you're an economist. You're used to dealing with loads of data.
Smaller data sets, frankly, than most companies work with because my data tends to be by month or by quarter or by years, and we only really have about 100 years worth of data. So if even you work with, monthly data, you've still got 1,200 data points. It's actually a very restricted range of information to try to get trends out of. Companies, with thousands of dozens of products at least and millions of customers, they've got probably more of a dimensional issue than you get with working macroeconomically.
It's amazing how much of this data comes from, I feel like we're fighting over how to pronounce the word. My brain's the surveys that come in. We sit as registered officers, so I see them all the time. Clients are like, oh, can you help me fill that in? These 12-page documents that come in and they're quite arduous to complete. Is this what all countries do? They just
Unfortunately.
just send out a mailer saying, please, can you fill it in?
Yeah.
How many people have you got? But the stuff it asks you for would be like, give the amount of sales you made in Japan or something. It's like, companies don't even know half the time.
I know. And this is, it's really bad that we're still using statistical agencies to do that because now, we have point of sale data. We could actually link into point of sale, anonymize it in ways that don't let the customer be exposed and so on. And we could be getting real-time data for the economy. We're not doing it. It's incredibly old-fashioned.
It's the same as surveys. There's an election going on. I always think, who stops to fill in a survey? It's like, well, someone who's got the time to do that. Who has the time to do that?
I turn down survey requests all the bloody time. Yeah.
It's so much of how we run our society is based on, but the other, it's based on someone stopping you in the street and asking you a question. I find those surveys just bizarre on any subject. It's like, 67% of people said they prefer to do this if they were, and you're like, well, of course they're going to say that if you're stopped in the street,
Yeah, there's a great, what's it called? Yes Minister episode on that. Have you seen that one about?
I love that program.
Sorry?
I love the program.
Well, there's one where Sir Humphrey is explaining to, what's the minister's name?
Alan or something.
It'll occur to us during the talk. But he's talking about national service. And, of course, that's one of Rishi's big – I couldn't believe that was one of his bloody brainwaves, but, national service. And he shows to Sir Humphrey shows to I can't think of his bloody name. Anyway, shows to the Prime Minister how to set up the questionnaire so people answer in favour of national service. And then come the opposite direction and say how ask another survey where you get people to be anti-national service. Do you believe in strong borders? Yes. Do you think we should control who comes into our country? Yes, etc. He said, oh, you're in favour of national service. And the other direction, do you want your child to die? No. Do you want them to be shot at? No. Do you in favour of national service? No. So
that's so true in life. I mean, I find the way, to be honest, I feel it's the big fault at the moment is we seem to be voting on the issues. The issues what we like to talk about, but none of us really know what we're talking about.
No.
And I mean, apparently this is how Greek politics would work. You'd vote for the people, but we've got a real problem with the people.
Well, I was actually chatting about this before you came in, and that is, was the Greek system what we call democracy, what the Greeks did? The answer is no.
No.
Okay. It was actually. Have you ever heard what the system was?
You tell me. I have a vague idea.
It's called sortition.
Sortition.
And what they would do is rather than two parties vying for vote and vote for me, and you get a narcissist leading the party, which is our current system. They would ask. I think there were 7 major families, Greek families in Athens. So they'd ask the major families to nominate 1 or 2 people to be the representative. And then they would ask those people, let's say you start with 7 and they're supposed to nominate 2 people each. Then ask the 14 people, who would you nominate?
Yeah,
and they'd nominate 2. And then they'd ask, and you'd say 28, and at some point they'd stop. But I think there are about 14 steps to it. And what it meant was there's no way the initial people had any control over who was nominated at the end.
Interesting.
But at each stage, you're not going to nominate the local village idiot. Like, you wouldn't nominate Donald Trump, for example. Or for that matter, Biden. So you'd nominate somebody because you can't control. If you started that process, the people you're asking know they've got no potential.
You just try and nominate someone decent.
Exactly.
Or intelligent.
Decent, intelligent, and then each person does it at each stage. So ultimately, you end up selecting, say, 150 intelligent, reasonable, empathic individuals to represent the entire, and that works.
Yeah.
That's what we should be doing.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's got lost in the, almost the American Civil War thing. No vote without representation.
It actually got lost in the French Revolution.
Was it the French when we started saying everyone has to have a vote?
I mean, I can't pronounce the French anymore, but it was right in the gauche, left and right sides of the chamber.
I don't mind the principle that everybody gets a vote, but that doesn't make a lot of sense if you're voting for the issues rather than the people. Because if you're voting for the people, regardless of intelligence or education, you would hope that people would, like in that very personal example, nominate someone they consider a mentor or a good person. So, for instance, you might vote for someone who might not be the brightest, but is very straight. Or who do you relate to?
Yeah,
I just find the way we are so buggered if we're going to take sound bites and turn them into, use these. And people get so angry about it. You try and talk about it. People are like red in the face. You don't understand. Oh, this is the issue. And it's just bizarre. And we will continue to go down the toilet on that basis, I think. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how you change the channel at all. I mean, your version is get rid of the Economists.
Definitely.
Because the Economists are sitting there telling government, it's all about the economy, stupid. So it's the ultimate issue in a way, whether or not we've got more money. But that is almost all a fugazi in the first place. It's a bizarre fugazi.
They don't know what they're talking about. The trouble is they get the mantle of experts, but they're not experts. They're experts on a model of the economy which is wrong, but they're not genuine experts, and they dominate all the other fields.
Well, I'm thinking of the spreadsheet again. I'm thinking you can put everything you want on a spreadsheet, and say, oh, these 2 metrics suggest X. Yeah. But it doesn't really mean anything.
And nobody knows what's going on or the logic behind it either. Yeah, so we've got incredibly stuffed up systems at a stage which is critical for the continuing existence of our civilization.
I mean, my other problem is journalism, that journalism has the power to divide us, and it seems to be doing a very, very good job at dividing us. People say, well, that's what they want to read and stuff. But I'm like, I think you have to regulate journalism and start saying, you have the power to divide us, so you have the duty to bring us together, just as, you would normally regulate something.
I spend, we're going all over the place, which is a lot of fun. Let's continue going anywhere. I spend a lot of time in journalism through my involvement with overseas aid, because one of the issues that we raised at that point, this is back in the 70s, the late 70s, is that there was very little coverage of third world issues in the newspapers. So what we thought we'd do as a group is we would get people to write letters to the editor back in the days when they were taken seriously. We had a group of about 30 people. We'd rotate each day. One person would have to write on third world issues to each of the newspapers. And we got quite a high penetration of stories going in that stage. And then what I realised and looking at, this is actually the time which was pivotal for us was when India's what's called Janata Party took over from Indira Gandhi. Okay, and then 3 years later, Indira Gandhi wipes the Janata Party, and it took everybody by surprise. And the reason was the Gandhi name is an accident. She's no relation to Mahatma, okay, but that was a large part of the image that they used to get power. And she was seen as an autocrat, and she got wiped out by the Janata Party, which means the People's Party. And then the People's Party fell apart because of its own internal political dynamics, and back comes Indira again. Now, because she was so unpopular in the media, nobody saw this coming in the Western media. But if you read the Indian media, you could see the potential for this was rising, that she could take over. And what my perspective was, and this is something which I found was part of the history of journalism as well, is that journalism as we practice it today and as was practiced back then is event-oriented. You know, man bites dog. A dog bites man is not news. Man bites dog is news. Okay, something unusual. And what happens in newspapers, again, this is no longer really necessarily the case because newspapers have gone down the gurgler through the internet. But you'd have a meeting every day where you would put your stories out, and then you'd look at the other newspapers and see what they covered that you didn't cover. And the question is, why did we not cover that particular event? So it was all a daily news focus. And what got lost in that is the issues over time that's making things change. So there was a push for what's called issues-oriented journalism versus event-oriented journalism. And the Australian Journalists Association was pushing that idea as well. And I realised that's what we need to understand what's happening. To get decent news, you need to look at the issues rather than just the events. So I suggested running a seminar where you'd have journalists from one country.
So an event happens, and you want to look at these surrounding issues that are causing
that led to the event. Yeah. So I organised this idea of issues-oriented journalism, and spoke at a conference on journalism. And in the audience was the director of the Australia-China Council, which is where the invitation came from me to run that seminar in China. So what we did was we got every newspaper article on China in the Australian press, and every article in the Chinese press on Australia, organised them on themes, education, environment, economy, agriculture.
That's an interesting spreadsheet.
Yeah, it's huge. When I took a box of we had to have one copy.
There wasn't much in China or in Australia? Or
there was a huge amount. It was quite remarkable, yeah.
Okay.
Because it's a large country, I mean, there's plenty of newspapers to cover from.
So you basically you got all of the press on China
and all of the press on Australia,
and then compared them.
And we had the journalists sitting down for a week in a seminar in Beijing. This is actually during the trial of the Gang of Four. I'll be able to tell your audience, Gang of Four is not a boy band. It was the remnants of Mao. After Mao died, Madame Mao's his wife took over running the country, and that was still the old-fashioned communist stuff. And then Deng Xiaoping came in. Somehow, I don't know how Deng got back into power again, but then put them on trial for the dominations that done under the communist period. So this seminar was happening in Beijing during the trial of the Gang of Four. And you'd walk around the streets of Beijing, and we were some of the very few foreigners there. And all the loudspeakers were broadcasting the trial live. Everywhere you went, you could hear the whole thing. So we had this 1 week seminar where I think there were about 25 or 30 Chinese journalists and 9 Australian journalists went through the issues in how Australia covered China and China covered Australia and so on. And that was my model of how you'd improve the quality of journalism. But a lot of it meant it wasn't a case of telling Rupert Murdoch he has to do the right thing. Strengthen the journalists. Yeah,
you're kind of doing what I would wish they would do, is really try and understand both sides of the question. Stop writing articles that I could only put it in the simple terms of if you think this is divisive, stop and take a duty to think, no, I've got to bring people together. So how do you bring people together? Well, you have to explain both sides of the issue. I mean, it's a real skill.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think journalism become they're all gone, aren't they? No, the advertising died because, you can't, I was only talking to someone the other day and it was, I think I was re-listening to Ted Edwards' podcast, but, he used to work in a computer magazine or whatever and they'd sell advertising. And he was like, oh my God, it was a license to print money, I mean, the amount, and then you had good journalists and off you go. So, I mean, it really concerns me that there's no, this sort of fundamental, when, you're for all your sins, you're an economist underneath it. And there are structural issues going on here.
A large part of it was they never worked out how to handle the internet because, as you say, they used to have the way you used to sell stuff was through the classifieds. And the classified, I don't know what the term was used. It was called the rivers of gold.
Yeah, was it? Yeah,
the only way you could make was advertise.
They make a fortune.
A huge fortune. Like when I was working in computer journalism, this is back in 81, 82, I was paid $1 a word.
Wow.
Okay, now you're lucky to get 10 cents a word these days.
You're lucky to be paid full stop.
Really. I know. So like that, then they were really, and like the Sydney Morning Herald, which was the newspaper in my hometown, when you got it on the weekend, it was about 3 inches thick. Large part of it was classified ads, but it was a huge amount of money. You had libraries to back you up. You had research staff. All that's gone. So now what we've got is a caricature of what journalism is supposed to be. You get a few good journalists and a few good outlets, but otherwise you've got Rupert Murdoch and it's all political agendas and being used to control how people think. And it's tragic that it's actually feasible to do that. But if you take a particular line on immigrants, you get the anti-immigrant sentiment. People are manipulated these days. They're not educated.
As someone who, I don't want to say you embrace controversy, but you generally, if you were being nice, you could say, well, you think for yourself, and if you were being mean, you'd say you're being controversial for the sake of it. Do you think that is an approach which bears fruit? In terms of creating change?
It is in a like a scientific way that it matters is what are called paradigms. Mm-hmm. Okay, and science is dominated by people having a particular idea of how reality functions, and that becomes your paradigm. And so if we go back to Aristotle and look at astronomy, which is the first area of science really developed, Aristotle's explanation for why the planets orbit the sun, orbit the Earth, and the sun and the moon and stars orbit the Earth was that the Earth is the center of the universe, and all the heavenly bodies orbit on perfectly concentric spheres, crystalline spheres. And that's the explanation for the structure of the universe. Now, there's one little problem with that paradigm, and that is that everything appeared to orbit the Earth evenly except the planets, which they couldn't see. I think at the time they couldn't see Mercury. They could see Venus, of course, Earth. They didn't think we were a planet, but they could see Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And what would happen with they would, rather than perfectly orbiting the Earth all the time, they would wander. They would, because we know what's happening now. Okay, the Earth is on this side, Mars is over there, Mars is going this way, and then on the same side of the planet, it's going that way. Mm-hmm. So if you look at it, here's a reverse direction. And the word planet in Greek means wanderers. Okay. So you had to have an explanation how the wanderers behave differently. And to explain that, they put spheres on spheres. So you'd have this perfectly concentric rings around the Earth, and then Mars is on one of those rings, and so is Venus, and so is Saturn. And then they're on their own little circles, and they circle on the opposite, So sometimes the circle's going that way, sometimes the circle's going that way. That paradigm, that way of thinking that you explain the orbits, could be made to fit the data. If you tortured it enough, and they had to do all sorts of things. So they had to put this planets on circles.
You can make anything fit. You can make anything fit.
Yeah, and there's a wonderful, you actually should see it, there's a wonderful thing, search on YouTube, you're most likely located. Somebody uses circles on circles on circles to draw Homer Simpson.
Okay.
It's marvelous to watch. So you can fit anything, with enough circles on circles on circles, you can fit it. So for 1,500 years, that was the vision that people had to explain why the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, why the moon orbits the Earth, why the planets do what they do. And if you're a scientist in those days, a Ptolemaic astronomer, you'd be spending all your time to work out, what location do I put the deference and what offsets do I have and where do I put the actual center of the universe, et cetera, et cetera. And you're competing and getting all these models.
And someone came in and said, well, how about the center being over there?
That's
and
right.
then suddenly everything works.
The sun becomes the center. But that was such a challenge to how people thought about astronomy that Galileo ends up in house arrest and has.
Oh yeah, he got in loads of trouble at the time.
He got loads of trouble. He put the dark glasses on. I know now why.
Oh,
you're not doing a Roy Orbison. You actually are doing a Roy Orbison because Roy had to wear them for that reason
too. Did he?
Too.
Was it migraine?
Something of that nature. I don't know if it's actually migraines, but he had to wear dark glasses.
Yeah, if anyone thinks I'm an arsehole, yes, I am. But B, I get a lot of migraines.
You identified Roy Orbison.
It's no one even knows this. It's migraine in British English.
Migraine?
Yeah, everyone's got used to saying migraine, but it's migraine. I mean, I've had them long enough that I remember how to say it. And I've won many a bet. You want to make a money? Say you pronounce it migraine, and they go no, and then they look it up on Oxford University,
and that's how it's pronounced
in British English. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, it's an E, not an I, isn't it?
Is it M-E?
I think so. Well, you pronounce it migraine. How do you spell migraine?
M-I. I think M-I-G-R-A-I.
Well, yeah, it is M-I.
Okay.
How have you said it?
It's Old English. It would be an Old English thing.
Yeah. So your point is, if I come to a point, I can make a controversial point, and if it fits, it fits.
Well, the thing is, and this is one of the problems of humans in general, we share beliefs. I mean, people think humans are different from the animals because we're intelligent. No, I think we're different because we can share what we believe. Okay? And once you share a belief and you agree with that belief, you act in concert in a way we wouldn't do if you couldn't share beliefs. So we can organise around religions. We can
share beliefs. We can share our ideas. We can organise around religions. Okay.
Now, people think science is different to that. Okay. But when probably the most brilliant historian of philosophy of science, a guy called Thomas Kuhn, he tried to apply this model that said that religions believes in myths, but scientists, they believe in they don't believe in anything. They're simply trying to explain the real world. So what they do is a scientist comes up with a bold conjecture, and this is the language of Karl Popper, a bold conjecture, and then they try to refute it. Okay, so the idea of what scientists do is they come up with some explanation,
try and disprove it,
and they then try to disprove it, and they're happy when they disprove it. Now, Kuhn tried to apply that to astronomy, and he found it didn't make sense because the Ptolemaic astronomers weren't trying to disprove their ideas; they were trying to confirm them. But he said at the same time, you couldn't put them down as being religious. They were incredibly detailed data. They had a way of trying to understand the real world. And Kuhn termed this idea of a paradigm. Now, he said there's two stages to science. One is when you've got a new paradigm and you want to expand what it can explain, and he calls that normal science. And if you think about with the Ptolemaic idea began with Aristotle and the idea that all the heavenly bodies orbit the Earth on perfectly concentric cycles. Well, there's an anomaly there because the planets reverse direction. So what do? You add another element to it and you have this circles on circles. Then you can explain it, the paradigm is complete. But, of course, it's not the real world. We know that that's not the structure of the universe. So things will happen which are anomalies that you can't explain from your paradigm. And if you want to change out of that paradigm, you've got to have somebody who can challenge that paradigm and say, the central idea you're working on is wrong. Now, along comes, it wasn't with the first, you have people who had the idea of the Earth being, that the sun being the center of the universe way back at the same time as Aristotle. But it took until the Reformation when you had people like Tycho Brahe, who was doing the observations of planetary bodies, very, very detailed. Without telescopes, people are so used to having all the technology we use these days, but Tycho Brahe made a whole range of devices to let him precisely say where the planets were and the shape of the orbits. And the orbits turned out not to be circular, they were elliptical. Then you had Kepler saying, working out the idea of the arc of a planet, creating an equal area in equal time. So you had this Keplerian idea. And then Galileo came along and invented the telescope. And then with a telescope, you could actually see the planets and see what they were doing. And one of the key ideas of the Ptolemaic system was everything orbits the Earth. The Earth is a place where change and decay occurs. The heavens are perfect, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the first thing Galileo looked at was the moon, and he saw craters. Okay, craters means there have to be collisions.
Yeah,
They're
true.
not perfect, okay? He saw moons orbiting Jupiter. And they couldn't be seen with the naked eye, of course, but he saw 4 moons. And so this completely changes the paradigm. Now, he tries to get his idea accepted, and what happens? He ends up being prosecuted by the Catholic Church. Okay? Now, we don't go quite that far these days, but anybody who's challenging a paradigm is an outsider, and you get repelled.
I feel like anything said on social media is like a paradigm, really. And anything, really, because you look at the viciousness of the comments and stuff.
Yeah.
It was an amazing post. I was reading about it, but Julia Roberts, the famous actress, posted a picture of her with her daughter or a niece playing cards.
Yeah.
And she was the hate she got, like, you look old, what happened to, it's really, it's sort of related to how people behave when they're driving a vehicle, when they're surrounded by men and they can do 100 miles an hour, we become real shits. But let's just go a little bit deep. Okay. So if your principle, within this, so one of these things that's a bit controversial, say governments aren't listening to listening to economists too much.
Yeah.
Where are the economists? Are they in the treasury? How does it function?
This is why I went back to being an academic, because it starts off at university and you learn a particular paradigm, and the paradigm's called Neoclassical economics. That's there've been about 3 major schools of economic thought over time in terms of dominant schools of thought. So the Neoclassicals began in the 1870s, and they said it's all about supply and demand. There's Alfred Marshall and the idea that the demand falls as price rises, supply gets more expensive demand falls as price rises, supply rises as price rises, but supply gets more expensive. It gets more expensive to produce more units, et cetera, et cetera. And that was the vision of what he called the scissors of supply and demand. And he said we might as well ask whether it's the top or the bottom blade of a scissor that cuts a piece of paper as to ask whether the price is set by supply or demand. In other words, it's both. That's the framework. And that was a rival to the classical school, which has ended up with Karl Marx. Karl Marx used the classical school as a critique of capitalism. He's saying capitalism should give way to socialism. Workers produce the output, workers produce profit, the actual source of profit, workers effectively deserve the profit. And so the classical school, which was used by Adam Smith and Ricardo to attack feudalism, was now used by Marx to attack capitalism. So the neoclassical school was really a reaction to Marx. And there were elements of the neoclassical school right back in Aristotle and Jean-Baptiste Say and Augustin Corneau and a whole range of people before Marshall turned up. But Marshall gave us this vision. And ever since then, that's been what students get taught at university. And what it gives you, and this is one reason why I think it's so powerful, like what hangs onto people's minds, is it's describing a utopia. Okay? According to Marshall's theory, effectively, capitalism is utopia because you get paid what you deserve. You get what's called your marginal product. So your return in this income in the system reflects your contribution to production. You maximize your utility. So you get the best possible outcome in terms of utility given the costs of production, et cetera, et cetera. And it becomes a very seductive view of capitalism as a perfect social system. Now, if you come along and say, look, I'm sorry, you've got some mathematical errors inside your logic there, they don't want to know. So what we have is paradigms last longer than they should. Okay, and like if I go to physics, the dominant paradigm in the 19th century on energy was that energy is a wave, light is a wave. Okay.
Yeah.
Now the question was, how do you explain how it travels through space? So the idea is this thing called the ether, that there's this substance in outer space that enables light waves to travel from the sun to the Earth. I forget
that was where the problem starts, isn't it? How does it travel in a vacuum and all that?
That's right. So you had what that implied was because there's a medium there and the Earth is moving through that medium, then light should be faster in one direction than in the other, okay? Because one way you're going with the Earth the other way, you're going against the direction the Earth's passing through the ether. There should be a speed difference. So Michelson and Morley, who are the people who did that experiment, measured very carefully using 19th century technology the speed of light in one direction, the other, and found it was identical.
Okay.
Now that meant you can't explain that with the ether theory. You've got to have a new paradigm.
Yeah.
So again, that also applied in particle physics. That way you got quantum mechanics from the work of Max Planck. So this is a revolution. You need a scientific revolution. You can't take the old paradigm and explain it. You've got to abandon the idea that light is a wave. Okay? Light becomes a wave and a particle, which is a huge shift. You've got to abandon the idea that energy is continuous. It has to come in discrete chunks that Max Planck called quanta. Now that's a revolution. And for most people, they can't make that change. So Max Planck, and he has a brilliant autobiography in which he says at one point, it's one of the great tragedies of my life that not once have I managed to convince my fellows to change their minds on the basis of a purely mathematical proof. He said that he didn't say this actual phrase, but the way it's been paraphrased is science advances one funeral at a time.
Advances one
funeral at a time. The idea is somebody who believes this old paradigm cannot change. They try to convince the students that they can fit the new anomaly with the old paradigm. The students put up with it, but they've seen the work of Max Planck, they've seen Michelson Morley, they've seen Black.
That would suggest that we're stuck in our ways and things have to kind of collapse for us to sort them out.
Yes, I'm afraid that's true. But what happens with young students, if you're a physics student back in the 19th century, and early 20th century, you know of these anomalies. You know somebody solved them. Your professor won't teach you this stuff, but you know it's real. Your professor has to retire, might even die. When he dies, he's got to be replaced. His replacements come from the student body. And the student's body said, right, now I'm going to teach the new paradigm. So you get generational change in science. It doesn't happen in economics.
I mean, it's almost the same problem in politics. It's almost the same problem in social society that we get fixated on an idea and we sort of struggle to evolve it. So, I mean, in terms of the sort of maybe it's not something you're privy to as whatever, but you know, you're more saying we're brainwashed into these concepts and it's very hard for us to shift out of them.
Yeah.
Because it's quite apocalyptic, some of the stuff that you suggest might happen.
Yeah.
Have you seen any of this apocalyptic?
Thank
you. Apocalyptic stuff happen? Has any of your sort of predictions come to fruition yet?
Well, the first one was the financial crisis.
Okay.
So if you look at how conventional economists, like, for example, Ben Bernanke, explained the Great Depression, his explanation of the Great Depression was that the Federal Reserve did not create enough money. Okay, it was the Federal Reserve's fault for not monetizing gold inflows that caused the Great Depression. And that was his thesis, that he effectively became a specialist on the Great Depression from a neoclassical point of view. And that was really the way he applied to get the job as Federal Reserve Chair. And then, of course, he becomes Federal Reserve Chair, and what happens? A rerun of the Great Depression, not as big, but that was the global financial crisis. Now, he completely rejected, not completely, he twisted the arguments of a guy called Irving Fisher. And Irving Fisher said the Great Depression was caused by a collapse in private debt. Rising private debt became falling private debt, and that's what caused the crisis. Now, he poo-pooed that argument on the basis that Fisher called his argument the debt deflation theory of Great Depressions. And Bernanke rejected it by saying, absent implausibly large differences in marginal propensities to spend, pure redistribution should have no significant macroeconomic effects. Now you can tell that's a quote. I've read that line so many bloody times, it's ridiculous. Page 24 of Ben Bernanke's essays on the Great Depression. Now when you read Fisher didn't have that explanation at all. Fisher said that what Bernanke was describing is what Fisher called a man-to-man debt. Okay? So a man-to-man, literally the language, of course, in the 1930s, if a man-to-man debt is repaid, there's no major impact out of that because the drop in spending power of the debtor is compensated by the rising spending power of the lender. So in that sense, Bernanke's dead right.
It all balances.
It all balances. But bank lending, you said, is different. When you repay a bank loan, that amount of money simply disappears. Okay, so paying bank debt down is far different to paying individual debt down. And he said that's what caused the Great Depression. People were paying their bank debt down. Because they paid their bank debt down, the amount of money in the economy declined. The decline in the amount of money, there was less profit again, and it was a road to nowhere. Okay, so that was Fisher's actual explanation. And Hyman Minsky, who was a student of another non-orthodox economist called Joseph Schumpeter. Schumpeter had a cyclical view of capitalism, not the equilibrium stuff at all. Minsky said that Fisher's explanation was right, so he tried to build a logical model, which we call the financial instability hypothesis. So I became exposed to Minsky's ideas when I did my master's degree. And this is coming back to your long-winded answer to your question about being an iconoclast, being contrarian. And I had read so many lefty attempts to explain capitalism's crises, and they all implied that capitalism had a tendency towards stagnation. And I thought, that doesn't make any sense to me at all, because what I saw was a tendency toward booms and then crashes. And Minsky gave a perfect explanation for that. He said that if you take an economy which has just been through a financial crisis, then in the aftermath of the crisis, everybody's conservative about the amount of debt they'll take on. Banks don't want to lend all that much, and individuals don't want to apply for debt in case they suffer the same fate on the other side. So the only projects you put forward for debt funding are going to be ones which are conservatively estimated. But because they're conservatively estimated, they're going to succeed. So people look at that and think, we were too conservative. We should have taken on a high level of gearing. We would have made more money. So over time, people's expectations shift. You go from being conservative and concerned about the last crunch to becoming more and more optimistic. And he talked about a transition in people's expectations, both banks and borrowers, from depressed expectations to what he called euphoric expectations. Then, of course, you start investing in far too risky stuff. The stuff fails, you have another boom.
It's humanity all over. Where are we in this cycle right now?
We're in the aftermath of the global financial crisis.
And
we haven't got ourselves out of it. If you take a look at the level of private debt, they've changed the definition of the numbers, unfortunately. So numbers that I was working on back when I was warning about the crisis are different now. But the level of private debt in America began at about 50% of GDP in 1945. It hit 170% of GDP in 2007. And I was looking at that ratio and saying that rise can't continue. It has to break, and when it breaks, there'll be negative credit.
The attitude now is everything's on rent, isn't it? Really?
Well, what happened was we should have reduced the level of private debt. That's what we should have focused on. But because you had neoclassical economists in charge of the government and policy making, Bernanke was Federal Reserve Chair. You had Hank Paulson, who I think was one of the executives of Morgan Stanley, who was Secretary of the Treasury. You had all these conventional economists, and they don't even know that private debt's a problem.
Yeah, wow. Okay.
So their advice was to get the banks to lend more money, the multiplier effect.
Do you think the interest rate make any difference, really, what they do with it?
They stuff things up as well. And again, this is a case where you've got a paradigm and you don't admit the paradigm has failed, so you keep on trying it. So according to neoclassical theory, and this is what they call the Taylor rule, which is part of the models they built of the macroeconomy, and they're called dynamic stochastic general equilibrium models, DSGE models. They presume that putting up the rate of interest roughly twice as fast as the rate of inflation rises will reduce inflationary expectations, and that will cause inflation to fall. So their theory is
it's so one-dimensional. Really.
So one-dimensional and so bloody wrong. Because look at the empirical data, and I've done this again in Ravel, which is the sort of thing I use it for. That implies that countries that put up the interest rate more rapidly will be ones that have a most rapid fall in the rate of inflation. Guess which country had the most in terms of advanced economies, the best performance in terms of
reducing. It must have been Europe. Didn't they put it up slowest? I don't know.
Japan,
okay.
At negative rates, minus a quarter of a percent. Right. They changed to zero a few quarters ago. But they did bugger all. They did nothing. And that had the best performance in terms of reducing the rate of inflation.
It's just politics again. It's just people feel that someone should do something. So I feel it's like, do something. All right, we'll put the interest rates up and that'll help. Sort of thing.
But it's got no effect. I mean, this is where you had some other iconoclasts turning up on the scene. So there's a youngish, I'm 71 these days, so I can say that sort of thing, youngish academic called Isabella Weber. And she was saying that what was actually causing inflation wasn't wage pressure, which is what's built into the mainstream models. It was people increasing markups, firms putting up markups. Now, they don't believe markups
It becomes
exist.
a vicious circle, you're meaning, people putting up their margin.
Yeah, putting up margins. And that's quite dramatic how much margins have risen over the last 40 years. But she argued that was what was causing the inflation, not wage rises. But according to the neoclassical model, there's no such thing as a margin. You profit maximize. You set marginal cost equal to marginal revenue. You don't have the capacity to set the markup yourself. That's given by the conditions of demand curve and marginal revenue curve, yada, yada, yada. In the real world, those are all myths.
That is all myths. And actually, when inflation is high, you need to put your prices up as a business, because the nature of prices is they tend to fix. We tend to have quite a sort of like, oh, it's £5, it's £5.
Yeah.
So you get these opportunities which are self-fulfilling, aren't they?
Yeah.
You've got to sort of put inflation up with the prevailing thing. So you think we're still trying to get out of the sort of the, I guess, the whole of 2008, are you, in terms of just trying to rebuild the economy? And what do we need to do to get out of it?
Well, we ignored the cause. And
Yeah.
we're still ignoring the cause. This is the crazy thing about mainstream economics.
Which is debt.
Which is debt, private debt. They obsess about government debt. They don't even think about private debt. But if you look at the data, and that's what Ravel lets me do very well, level of private debt's between 1.5 and 2 times the level of government debt in virtually every economy on the planet.
And I guess, yeah, I mean, it's a good segue into Ravel allows you think, an advantage in analyzing this information.
Yeah, I had to have the theory first of all. So I would have been using R or Python.
But it's faster.
It's
and
faster,
easier.
and I can show it straight away and, shock people. And, oh, gee, government debt's less than private debt. I didn't know that. There's a couple of exceptions.
Why do we ignore? What is this? It's a huge cultural change, debt, that it's sort of okay to have debt.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's another brainwashing, isn't it?
It's also time. I mean, like I remember very vividly being a young child and just being told to set the table in one of my mother's cousins' homes, and noticing this strange paper that lined all the cutlery drawers. And I finally realized they were share certificates from the 1920s.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So what happened was you bought in all these companies in the 1920s, making a fortune while the bubble goes on. The bubble crashes, all the companies fold, and a lot of them fold. You've got these share certificates. What the hell do you do with them? This family lined their cutlery drawers with them. So if you go back to the aftermath of the Great Depression and the Second World War, my parents at that stage were incredibly conservative about taking on debt. They wouldn't do it because they'd seen what happened in the 1920s and 1930s and 1940s. And that whole process, the bubble in the 1920s led to the Depression in the 1930s, which led to the Second World War, okay, with a bit of help from, the Treaty of Versailles. But that's nature, that being totally conservative about debt was just built into people after the Great Depression and the Second World War. So people wouldn't borrow money. Or if you bought anything, you'd buy it on lay-by. You remember what lay-by is?
Yeah. Okay. Layaway isn't the other name for it? Or
possibly. You say, I want to buy that item, and you're going to come in each week and pay 10% of it off, and after 10 weeks, you've got enough money saved. So lay-by was used, not debt. Now, as time went on from that process, and this again is partly Minsky's theory, the memory of that fades. And therefore, people get less worried about debt, so more willing to borrow money. And then when you borrow money, you increase the level of demand in the economy. It amplifies the growth pattern. And we've now got an economy dominated by private debt and dominated by cycles in private debt, which our economic managers completely ignore.
And do you think if we're all psychologically thinking the end is nigh, we're in this, the psychology now is very like, oh my God, everything, climate change, we're all screwed. That makes you short-termist, doesn't it? That makes you think, well, bugger it, I'm going to live today, I'm going to borrow money.
But I think at the same time, I've got to, as you know, I blame economists for trivializing the dangers we face in global warming.
Yeah.
So
almost distracting from it, I would almost say.
Oh, totally. I mean, like the thing which is the best sign that you can't trust economists on climate change is the person who most often quotes economists to defend not doing anything on climate change is Bjorn Lomborg.
Okay.
The world's greatest trivializer of climate change. And he will pull apart articles by scientists saying, oh, well, this scientist said this, but if you look on page blah, he leaves out this factor, yada, yada, yada. He comes out and quotes Economist as though it's gospel. But you read what can I use French in this program?
Yeah.
You read the shit they wrote and you think this is delusional. Okay? Nordhaus, I think I mentioned it on the last show, but I'll say it again. Nordhaus assumed in a paper in 1991 that you could break the economy into 3 divisions: seriously exposed to climate change, moderately exposed, and negligibly exposed. He put 3% of the economy in the seriously exposed, basically forestry and agriculture, 10%, so 3%, 10% in moderately exposed, so construction and transportation, parts of transportation. 87%, he said, would be negligibly exposed to climate change because it happens in what he called carefully controlled environments. Now, that's lunatic as soon as I saw that. But that led him to conclude that 3 degrees of global warming would cause a 1% fall in future GDP compared to what it would have been in the absence of global warming. And he said, I might be able to get it up to 2%, but my hunch, this is literally published in an academic paper, my hunch is that the damage will be no more than 2% of GDP. And you look at it and think, you're crazy. You can't possibly understand what you're talking about to say that.
Why? Why is he saying that?
Because, again, he's an economist. They want to say the market can solve all problems.
That's the fundamental belief.
That's the fundamental belief. Therefore, global warming can't be a problem.
Don't worry about it. People will build the machines and sort the world out.
The market will solve it. The market will solve it.
And you see boom and crash and boom and crash. And one of these crashes is climate change.
And that's the biggest crash of all. And that's coming our way. And we're starting to see, unfortunately, the symptoms of that. Whether have you seen the number of times you're looking at a clip on Twitter?
All I know is I haven't seen the sun this year, and that's bloody weird.
Yeah,
it does occasionally happen. I remember it happening in about 2005 or 2006. It happened because I remember no summer ever happened, and I even there's a rap song and the summer never seemed to happen, and I remember thinking, God, that's so true, and obviously in this country we don't get much of it, but that's not real climate change. But sorry, you were giving an example.
Well, I mean, it's things like the number of times you would have seen a video clip on Twitter where there's a river of ice flowing down somewhere, like an ice river running through Milan, hailstorms, enormous hail. That is something which has just this last couple of years become a phenomenon that's so common and it's been repeated all over the planet. We're seeing there's now a danger that what's called the AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, people who thought that wasn't going to flip for a couple of centuries and 3 degrees of warming. Now the experts are saying it looks like it could be flipping now.
Isn't the problem, though, that the climate change people are just a load of statisticians anyway? It's another load of economists, aren't they?
They're just a different... I have much more respect. Economists are not scientists. Economists
at the end
of the
day, the predictions, though, and I'm sure I'm offending everyone with this, but yeah. But from a point of view, isn't the easy criticism to just say, well, you've got your data, we've got our data?
Well, yeah, that's exactly what Nigel Farage was saying recently.
Right.
The climate's been changing for millions of years.
No, I don't mean that. I mean that. So, if economists are doing their little graphs and coming up with stuff which you see as wrong and saying, oh, well, capitalism will work it out and probably be okay and some people will die, but it'll work itself out. And then there's some other people coming from the perspective of looking at it from a pure science saying, oh my God, it's the end of the world. Aren't these sort of just, opposing ways of coming at a
Nothing
problem?
like it.
Nothing like
it. I've read probably 500 economic articles on climate change and maybe 800 articles for scientists on climate change. And the standard difference is...
It's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. I mean, the stuff that economists publish is just hand-waving garbage.
Right.
Absolutely dreadful stuff.
Do the climate change articles, do they tend to pick on certain topics and try and unravel from a science point of view? They'll go, let's look at what you just mentioned. Why is this happening?
Yeah. Like, for example, one of the leading scientists on tipping points is a guy called Tim Lenton, who's at the University of Essex. And Tim did a survey of climate scientists about tipping points back in 2008. Okay, and in that survey, they identified something like about 250 experts in different things. So there'd be an expert on the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation. It'd be an expert on the Arctic, an expert on Greenland, et cetera, et cetera. And he then said, I want you to go through each of your specialties, stick to what you're a specialist in, don't give me general comments, and I want you to say, what temperature level do you think is likely to trigger your particular part of the climate system into flipping from one state to another? So Greenland from ice, for which reflects sunlight, to rock, which absorbs it, that sort of thing. What temperature would cause that flip to occur, and how long would it take? Okay, and it was very, very carefully assessed. You didn't listen to their opinions in general. It had to be their specific area of interest. The temperature would generate, do you think that particular part of the climate will affect another part of the climate? And for example, the Arctic summer sea ice was one of the ones that they identified back in 2008 as being potential to tip from one state to another. So it goes from being 90% ice, so it reflects sunlight when it falls on it, to 90% water, so it absorbs the sunlight. That's a tipping point. They've now, in recent work, they've actually ruled it out as a tipping point, not because it won't tip, but because it can be changed back very easily. So the definition of a tipping point now is that it must be something which is very hard to reverse. So if Greenland melts, how long are you going to take to refreeze it? Forget it. The Arctic, they say, well, that could actually be converted back, so it's not a tipping point. That's the care that the scientists put into their definitions. Now, to give you an idea of what Nordhaus is like, and this is why I find it outrageous that he was given any prize at all, was that in his paper in 1991, where he said 87% of the economy takes place in carefully controlled environments, which will not be affected by global warming or climate change, he included mining. He said all of manufacturing, all of mining, all of wholesale and retail services, all of the government sector, all of the finance sector and insurance, I believe, will be unaffected by climate change. Now, somebody must have pointed out to him, William, there is open-cut mining, So the next time he published a number, he said 85% would be affected, and he had underground mining. Now, that's a give. That's like a card player. You can tell what's in their hand.
Yeah.
Obviously, he has said exposed to the climate means exposed to the weather. Now, he also assumes that climate change doesn't destroy capital machinery. Now, you take one look at any of the storms, like the hurricanes that went through America in the last couple of months. Have been some serious hurricane events. One hit Houston, hurricanes in Houston. That destroys machinery. It destroys capital. They simply assume the capital is repaired in the year in which the damages are done.
But if the public as a whole, maybe it's not true, but I think the public as a whole think, there's a climate crisis and they're all really worried about it.
Yeah.
But, what should the government be doing? Just just almost like a war, just saying, right, we have to have a total, what is it they call it, total war economy, isn't it? We just have to say, forget everything else.
Yeah.
We're going to work on the climate change. I mean, is that the kind of...
That's the kind of thing that I feel that I know, Peter Kalmus is one of the climate scientists I can quote on that point straight away, because Peter has got himself arrested making this case. He said, we put thousands and thousands of papers out. Nobody's listened to us, so I'm going to lock myself to the door of Shell. So they're getting that exasperated. These are people they really are experts on the area, and they are terrified. There's some people, like at one extreme, you've got Michael Mann, who says, we can get there. It's not catastrophic. We've got time to adjust. We can, if we live to the Paris Accords. More optimistic
and more pessimistic.
More optimistic, but there's quite a large number who are extremely pessimistic and are basically not quite.
It's amazing. The Green Party's not even in the running in this election. I don't even know where it is.
Well, that's again, I mean, the short-term focus you mentioned for humanity.
Yeah, we don't
general.
want change now.
No, and the thing is, we are living incredibly comfortable lives, and we're not really conscious of what actually causes that comfort. So one of the big things that I've worked on is bringing energy into theories of how production occurs, because ridiculously, both mainstream theories and even the non-mainstream stuff had no explicit role for energy. Now, the little insight that let me do the mathematics to work out the role was simply walking through a friend's house one day, the friend being an expert in energy. And he had all these statues throughout the house, and just walking back to them, going to the loo, back home, and said, labour without energy is a corpse. Capital without energy is a sculpture. In other words, energy is an input to labour and capital to enable them to do work. Unless you have the energy input, you have zero output. So that enables you to do the mathematics of bringing energy into production functions. Now, still to this day, economists don't have any role for energy in their theories. So we're blind to that. And we're also blind to the lights you put your sunglasses on.
Oh my God, those lights.
The lights, okay, there's energy out of that. The sign of they're telling you how much time we've got.
I was thinking this very basic thing. Maybe it's the Oppenheimer film and all of that. But it is mad the way we invented nuclear. And then we haven't really harnessed it. We invented something. We built some bombs. They scared everyone. So we went, we don't want to do that.
Yeah.
We renamed nuclear magnetic resonance, an MRI, because we didn't want to put nuclear in the term.
Yeah.
Everyone got this sort of, and that, again, it's bad journalism to me. I'm not even blaming the journalism, but it's like us just being idiots about the subject and saying, but because do we look back in history when the climate change, if catastrophe happens, and say, for fuck's sake, I know it wasn't, it wasn't perfect, it wasn't fusion, but we had fission and we had, nuclear power, we had, masses of power we could have produced globally and sorted this problem out. I mean, there's a stupidity there, I feel.
No, humans. I mean, one of my little expressions about humanity is to compare them to ants. And ants are individually stupid and collectively intelligent, and we're the opposite.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. Well, you get the wisdom of the crowd, don't you? But the sort of the way we
opposite to be the popular delusions and the madness of crowds. If I can quote Charles Mackay out here, and we do get caught up in fads, and that comes back into us doing belief sharing systems. And if we have a belief, we will all jump on the belief, and then we'll cause a boom and a crash.
Don't you feel the other thing? It's like I was hanging out with someone from Singapore. The benevolent dictator has a lot to be said for itself, and maybe China's got one more than we give credit for.
This is. I'm going to come back to a sortition comment beforehand. I've experienced the worst of the Communist Party, not the worst, but I've had tastes of what it can do. But at the same time, I've seen the level of shared decision-making that can occur there too. In its own bizarre way, the Communist Party in China is a form of sortition system. Okay, you've got to have some skills to get in. You've got to have some skills to get to the top. You also, you've got to suck up to the right people. That was a huge issue with Mao. It's been less so since Deng Xiaoping. But what you've got is intelligent people making decisions. My little experience of that was a bunch of, when I was doing the China seminars, I was involved with a lot of Chinese visitors to Australia. And I wasn't at this particular meeting, but I heard about it. One of the Chinese delegates went to the loo, didn't come back. And finally, people got worried, better go and see if he had a heart attack or collapsed. And they go up and open the toilet there. And there he is taking apart the toilet to work out how a double flush system works. So this is a politician, sent out, but he's an engineer as well. And he was fascinated by the engineering and forgot about the meeting. Now, you look at what's being done in China, incredible engineering.
Yeah.
And
it's the fact that you can drive through things that you might not like. And there's got to be a belief in the greater good that, we don't want anyone to die.
Yeah.
And we want everyone to be okay.
Yeah.
If you can believe that, then you might accept. I mean, Singapore is one of the few examples, I think, of that. It's become more and more liberal as a place.
Yeah.
Seeing an Australian friend of mine the other day who's lived in Singapore for years, she was just like, things just happen.
Yeah.
I mean, we're just told what to do. And
it manages
cool with
well.
It.
I mean, I remember once I was in Singapore, waiting to get the Luxor somewhere, and this person furtively shoves a leaflet in my hand, and I can still remember reading it. It said, the blood-sucking Lee Kuan Yew clique. That was the opening line. And I thought, shit, if I was Lee Kuan Yew, I'd be trying to shut these twits down. So, but he was somebody who truly was a benevolent dictator.
Yeah.
And what he did with Singapore, it included one stage, there were too many sweatshop type businesses. This is back about 1977. Too many sweatshop businesses in Singapore. So he increased the minimum wage by 28%.
Wow.
Overnight. The whole idea was
did he really in Singapore?
Did drive out those cheap. If you can't pay a decent wage, you don't belong in Singapore. And people say that's terrible and that's imposing on the market system. Look where Singapore became and where it's been ever since.
Which they keep trying to sort of replicate here. But you Yeah, you feel like ultimately, we need to almost change the entire political system to be able to just be a bit more. Another example, I find the EU. They go, "Oh, it's an unelected." I know you're not necessarily a massive fan of the EU.
I'm not. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's an unelected group of people. But here's all these intelligent people trying to work out the solution to stuff. I mean,
the trouble is they've what got them truck is again Economists, and this particular bunch they're called ordo liberals. There's sort of a weird combination of Austrian economists with neoclassical, and they believe government debt's the major problem. So the thing limiting the EU
they
is
get
the
obsessed about government debt.
Yeah, the wrong thing. It's private debt that matters.
Ironically, it seems to be immigration being the driving issue, whether it be in Britain or in other countries, that is causing a sort of far-right movement that could lead to some sort of autocratic kind of setup.
At the same time, because you had a suppression of demand by not letting the government create as much fiat money as it was doing before things like Maastricht and before economists took over the management of the economy, you've had lower growth, and people who suffer from that are the working class.
Yeah.
And so the working class end up voting right wing. Now I saw that coming my way in Australia. This is way back in the 70s. I was a member of the Labor Party for 1 year, but I got bored shitless and didn't renew.
You're not left or right. I don't know what you are. You're sort of, would you categorize yourself? I mean, it's a stupid question.
In my personal politics, I'd be seen as left. I've got George Galloway. I like George. Okay, he's a good bloke. I like him, but he's religious. I'm agnostic.
Yeah.
Okay? I have friends. There's a guy who's going to be publishing my next book, Vox Day. Vox is a known intellect on the right, but he loves my approach to economics. So I'm happy to work with people who politics are different to mine if I respect their ethics. And that's probably the defining feature for me. And I've seen very unethical behaviour on the Labor Party side of things and very unethical stuff on the Conservative side of things. So there's a way in which they're political machines, and they select for people who are going to work within the machine rather than people who work for the ethical principles that the party is supposedly dedicated to.
Do you have a sort of long-term ambition?
My long-term ambition, and I said this last time you interviewed me, was to kill the neoclassical economics before I die.
Okay, and it hasn't changed.
I don't think I'm going to get there. Okay,
No.
I think it's going to continue. And the only thing that's going to kill neoclassical economics is capitalism being destroyed by neoclassical economics. And that's the title of my next book, How Economics Will Destroy Capitalism.
Wow. Okay. And are people joining you on this path?
I've got actually out of batch.
You having a little party now?
I've got about look at my Twitter followers and my YouTube and all that sort of jazz, a reasonable number there. I've got about 1,500 people who support me financially on crowdfunding through Patreon and Substack. And I'm also now giving online courses, which came about as a marketing ploy that a company put to me. And I went along with it because I thought they'd have to pay me $3,000. They promised to increase my salary, my earnings by $10,000 or give me $3,000. Well, it's cheap, $3,000. That's actually led to a set of online lectures I'm giving. And I've got about 250 people who've signed to that so far, and I want to see it grow. So I do have a following of sorts. But I haven't got a crowd like the modern monetary theory crowd have behind me.
Well, it's so hard to achieve your aim because your aim is so destructive. It may be creative ultimately, coming from a good place, but it sort of requires it's anarchical.
It sounds. I mean, I really, if I could, I'd like to have a universal basic income so I could give money to every economist to go home and play tiddlywinks, which would be preferable to what they're doing right now, mainstream economists. So it is destructive, I agree. But again, Galileo is destructive. I'm not saying I'm on Galileo's standards, but Galileo destroyed the careers of people who were toll-make astronomers.
Why can't you and other economists, why can't more of those people come to the floor and advise governments better?
Well, partly because we can't get past the neoclassicals.
You just can't. It's just like a wall of that's the way it is. That's the way it is. That's the way it is. So it's the death thing. You need them to die almost.
Well, yeah. And dying doesn't work because they can always find people who are willing to replace them.
Yeah.
This is why generational change is what I think is the huge difference between economics and genuine sciences. Because with the genuine science, the anomalies that occur in physics are permanent. Once somebody's discovered an anomaly, it's still there. You've got to explain it. Whereas in economics, if you have a crisis like the Great Depression, You forget about it after the Second World War. You forget about it, not totally, but the memory, you can't reproduce a crisis which was an anomaly for the theory. You have another anomaly and another anomaly.
And we bury bad memories too.
I remember when I first gave a presentation on my model of Minsky back at the University of Western Sydney when I first started there. One of the lovely, very conventional neoclassicals. So you get, he was not top rank, he's down the bottom somewhere, but a nice guy. And he said to me, Steve, the difference between you and me is I believe people learn from their mistakes.
Yeah, wow.
And I replied, yes, Andrew. And the other difference is I believe people die and people forget.
Yeah. Yeah, what a thought. If you make lots of money out of Ravel, would you take that money and try and just continue to fund a sort of, I guess, almost a political
yeah. Look, there's about 30, I know everybody I want to hire. And there'd be about 30 people I'd want to hire and say, okay, now we're going to build the alternative paradigm.
Is that that would be a think tank?
It'd be a think tank, yeah. But people actually think rather than thunk.
Yeah.
Do
you have any sense of these other think tanks like Tony Blair's or whether
they're all neoclassical?
It's so fundamentally,
it's everywhere.
God, that's very frustrating for you constantly.
You either get Marxist groups at the other extreme. Like the very first paper I had published in a refereed economic journal was critiquing Marx's labour theory of value. And so when I'm saying neoclassicals can't change their mind, the same thing applies to Marxists. I'm actually you've heard of modern monetary theory? Okay. Modern monetary theory, when it comes to talking about the government accounting and how governments create money, is 100% correct. Okay. And my Minsky software gives them mathematical confirmation their theory is correct. But they've also got harebrained ideas about exports. They believe exports are a cost, imports are a benefit, and a trade deficit is a good thing.
Yeah, there's some really weird outcomes.
Now, that's nonsense.
What's the main principle of modern monetary theory is?
The public deficit is the private surplus. Let's say the government runs a deficit, that dollar for dollar creates an equivalent surplus in the private sector, and that's mathematically correct.
Right.
You do the accounting. If the government runs a deficit,
and you should almost produce more money, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's actually how you create fiat money, and this is why it's so frustrating for me to see this not being accepted by politicians, and they think they've got to keep the government debt level down. When the government spends more than it takes back in taxation, it puts more money into people's bank accounts than it takes out of their bank accounts. So the deficit the government records is equivalent to the increase in money in people's private bank accounts. That's number one. So one of the reasons we had such a strong recovery after COVID is all the money that governments were injecting into people's bank accounts to stop the financial sector collapsing. For a lot of Americans, the furlough pay was more than their weekly pay. Okay?
Yeah.
They did better out of the furlough.
Oh, yeah.
That stimulated. That's why the American economy is still booming. Interest rates are actually a positive. If you put up the interest rates on government bonds, you're putting more money into bank accounts of people who own bonds. So partly, and the MMT makes this case, and they're definitely correct, part of this reason the American economy hasn't had a recession so far is because of the stimulus caused by the interest rates, which neoclassical economists think are reducing demand.
Yeah, right.
So all this, but you've got this barrier. You can't get past the neoclassicals.
Nor can modern monetary theory, because you're not quite modern monetary.
I support.
You like some of it.
I can 100% agree with them on the domestic money creation and the fact that the government should be always running a deficit, almost always, okay, because that's creating fiat money. And we live in a mixed economy of fiat money creation and government and credit money creation. By suppressing government deficits, you're not creating enough fiat money, and we get the imbalances that lead to things like the financial crisis. So I'm in favour of that. But they've got notions about exports and imports that I think are nonsense. And as it happens, I haven't actually written that up but just recently I copped a bit of tribal behaviour by MMT, and so I've decided something that I wasn't going to do because I didn't want to derail them, open slather. So I'm now going to be writing critiques of their arguments on exports and imports.
What's it like being an author?
It's good. It's a pleasure. You should give it a try.
What's bullshit about being an author?
Oh, God. You get obsessed by it. Okay, and you've got this. You are a living being trying to create a book, and that gets to be quite exhausting, but obsessive. So when you see at the front, you'll always get an author saying, "I thank my spouse." You're basically saying, "I thank my spouse for not throwing me out."
Yeah, wow.
'Cause
Do you work like flat out? Are you?
I'm getting old and I can't do it as hard as I used to. But yeah, I work 7 days a week.
Do you? Okay. And which bit do you enjoy the most?
I love the teaching. And I think a large part of
That's the surprise that you sort of did these courses and things like this, or teaching in university, or
anything. I mean, like Minsky is a teaching tool in that sense. The thing that I think is the most remarkable thing that we're likely to lose is the amount of knowledge we've accumulated, certainly in the last quarter millennium, but ever since the Reformation, ever since Galileo. We've learned an enormous about the universe, and what I'm worried about is not deaths, because I think there's going to be too many to count. We're not going to stop it. What I'd be really terrified about doing is losing all that knowledge and going back to a dark age type civilization. And I do think that's what's going to happen.
It could happen. It's happened before. And we don't actually even know how many times it's happened before.
No, we've got ancient civilizations that fail, We know that's happened on a regional basis. We're now the first civilization that could do it on a global basis. And the fact that we aren't afraid of that is a sign of how short-sighted economists are.
Is there a country, if you had to live in a country right now that you think is getting things better, or
they're all dominated by neoclassical economy? China is a difference, okay? If you
what is China's economic theory? How are they viewing the world?
They went straight from reciting labor theory of value Marxism to teaching Samuelson's book.
Right.
Okay? But the difference is the selection process inside the Communist Party largely gets that engineers and scientists end up being the bosses. So you get engineers and scientists, and they want to build stuff.
Yeah.
So like you got the way in which China's built its high-speed rail.
Oh, it's insane.
And have you been to Shanghai?
I have been to Shanghai, yeah.
I
went when I was young too. I went when I was 17, so I went in like 1991 or something.
Okay, well, I'm going to beat you because I went there in 1981 when I took this bunch of
it was such a different place.
Oh, it was amazing because I was like the Bund is the main river running through Shanghai. It runs into the Yangtze, doesn't it? I'm never quite sure. The Bund is a tributary of the Yangtze. It's huge. I mean,
so wide. It makes the Thames look so skinny.
Yeah, it's about twice the width of the Thames. I think it's not ginormous. But anyway, on the I don't know what the north side. I think it was the north side. That was where all the city was in 81, and you had mainly Russian and French buildings, the style of architecture. The other side was paddy fields.
Wow.
Okay. Did you see paddy fields when you went in 91, or was it starting to have a city both sides?
That's a great question. I remember the Peace Hotel. I remember bits I remember. I just remember going back and being like barely recognizing anything.
Unbelievable.
I don't remember the paddy fields. I remember everyone eating chalk ices.
Yeah,
so everyone would come out in the evening
teas.
and they'd sit in deck chairs.
Yeah.
And chalk ices were popular. So people go around with those box of classic chalk ices, and everyone was having. Yeah, but so on one side of the river, it was just where the huge building is now, the tall building. That was just paddy fields.
That's paddy fields.
I could believe that was like that because I was kind of confused that there were buildings on the other side. Okay.
Yeah. Now there's spectacular light shows and incredible buildings and technological level which is breathtaking, and they've done that in 40 years.
I know, that's insane.
So it's just,
but they've been run by engineers, you're saying, rather than
fundamentally run by engineers. That's the difference. Engineers want to build stuff.
I'm just going to ask you some quick questions, Steve. And all you got to do is tell me the answer. You'll know the answer, I would think. So what was your first job?
Working in a thing called Trash and Treasure. And that was a weekend market where people bought on secondhand stuff as junk to sell, or arts and crafts. And I had a great bunch of people we were working with. I really liked the staff, and I couldn't handle the asshole who ran the company, who turned up in a Rolls Royce every week with a different dolly bird on his arm.
Lucky man.
Yeah. Well, anyway, wasn't my sort of person.
No, quite. And what was your worst job?
I worked in a factory. Actually, first job out of school was actually working in a factory, which was making sheet metal filing cabinets and stuff like that, and unair conditioned in the middle of a Sydney summer.
Oh my God!
And there were two of us working with what do you call them? Arc welding, not arc welding, but spot welding on aluminium. And we had this bit of an asshole who just was telling us to work faster. And this was a boom. This is an absolute booming economy. So we thought we'd set him up, and we managed to make so many filing cabinets, he told us to stop making them. We completely jammed up the entire output of the factory.
I love it. Favorite subject at school?
Was mathematics.
Very nice.
And unfortunately, I didn't have good enough mathematics teachers, so I didn't go on as a mathematician.
And what's your special skill?
Seeing through bullshit.
That's a good one. And what did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be a physicist. That was my main interest. But again, bad science, good person, but a poor mathematics teacher and teachers. And then the same in science. We had the same boring guy for 6 years, and he just didn't stimulate us. So I had a brilliant teacher in year 11 in economics, and that's why I went to the economics projection.
It's amazing how the teachers do that.
Yeah.
You get a good one. What did your parents want you to be?
They wanted me to be a conservative. My father challenged me at one stage.
What, a politician?
No, not conservative. Politically, economically conservative. Wanted me to get a job.
Okay.
So my dad was a bank manager. My mother was a secretary in the bank. And they basically wanted me to go to like a job as an accountant or a lawyer.
Very sensible parents. Well done. Do you have a go-to karaoke song?
Memories of a man in his old age, the deeds of a man in his prime. Shuffle in the gloom of your sick room and talk to yourself as they die. Life is life is a brief, short moment, and death is a long, cold wait. You get your chance to try in the twinkling of an eye. 80 years with luck or even less, and I've lost the tune, but it's Pink Floyd.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That was a great line. Shuffling in a room.
Yeah.
Office dogs, business or bullshit?
Sorry?
Office dogs, business or bullshit?
Business. One of my greatest regrets is not taking my dog, Bilbo, to work with me every day, because the poor thing ended up suffering from depression. He was the most intuitive, empathic.
They don't understand why you keep leaving them.
Exactly.
It breaks their heart.
Yeah, it did. And I really regret not taking him to work every day.
Thank you for saying that. Have you ever been fired?
Yes, I was fired by Trash and Treasure because the bastard would. We charged 20 cents or 40 cents entry for individuals, but $10 for stall holders, and we had a limit of $4 where we made a mistake, otherwise it'd come out of our pay, which we thought was crazy. So the group of us started siphoning off some of the money. And they found we were soft enough, and they sacked a lot of us.
I quite like the name, Trash or Treasure.
Yeah. But they should have, they treated the staff badly enough for us to want to con them.
And what is your vice, Steve? Give me a proper vice.
I live in Amsterdam. That'll do you?
Do you? Oh, do you really? Oh, wow. Good man. I agree with that wholeheartedly. Okay, now we're just going to have a little bit of fun.
Yeah.
And we'll get a paddle. Get your paddle out.
Okay, got him. Just one paddle does?
Just one
it.
paddle.
Okay.
I'll have the other paddle. Just in
okay,
case.
right, okay. Yep. There you go.
And we're just going to name some stuff, and let's just decide if it's business or bullshit.
Okay.
DQ the music, and we're off.
Okay.
Ooh, family business. Careful now. Oh, Steve.
I think it's bullshit. Family and business can make both function extremely badly. So
It's true.
I hate the thought. I wish it wasn't the case, but I had a very bad experience helping out a family member in a business, and the two ended up in a bullshit experience for me.
We had a guy on here explain that family businesses are like really successful actually, and all of these sort of counterintuitive things. But I would agree they put a tremendous strain on the family. What family member was it to you?
I can't really say.
Okay,
It was
okay.
It ended up
I've
dividing
worked
the
with
family.
my entire family and most of
Yeah.
my friends.
Yeah.
You know. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but that's the risk you play. It's
yeah.
eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
Business plans.
Often, I think bullshit, because sometimes the plans will be based on an intelligent assessment of what's feasible, but often you'll get a fad, and the fad gets rolled forward.
Have you got a business plan for Ravel?
No, I thought it was a damn good product and I wanted to make it. And even if it failed as a business, I have a brilliant piece of software for my analysis. So I think, we see this with Boeing right now. It got
Boeing, the plane manufacturer.
Boeing, it started going down when people who did planning took over. When you had people who wanted to build beautiful aircraft, Boeing was, if it's not Boeing, I'm not going.
Yeah.
Now if it's Boeing, I'm not going. So
Yeah.
the focus on business plans and profitability and so on has destroyed the engineering side of the company.
Would it survive Boeing?
I don't think so.
Oh, do you think it might go?
I think it'll go, yeah.
Wow.
Well, see, Airbus is already taking over a lot of their business, but now the Chinese are making planes.
Oh, wow.
Now, if you have an engineer, they're not going to let that. A Boeing's not going to happen in China.
It's like the cars are starting to come through.
Yeah,
I just saw
that's
this
right.
car
BVD
online that
yeah.
has like this crazy suspension that can go over any speed bumps and the car stays exactly still.
And that's engineering again.
Yeah.
So if you focus on the engineering rather than business plans, you're going to do better.
Yeah, like the Germans. We're good at tinkering in the garage, I always think. Okay, you mentioned one of these golden parachutes.
I actually want to, I might well take one of those if people offer me enough money for Ravel.
Wouldn't it be nice?
Yeah, because I don't want to live in, I'm 71, I'm not going to start a business and a startup and that sort of jazz. I'm doing it because that's just how the timing worked out. But yeah, I'd like to golden parachute out and do what I want to do, which is focus upon building a new economics. And I want to get rid of the research systems we have that end up destroying creativity. And there's other things I want to do. So I want to parachute out into something else. So I'm going to give that a business. Okay.
I can't believe this one has come up. Climate change. You've got to think about
That's the business.
It is business.
Because if we are going to let climate change destroy the stability on which our capitalist system has been based, humanity. I'll start my new book with not CO2. I'm going to show temperature data going back 540 million years. Scientists have built 4 different approaches.
That we can work out. But
Okay, what you can see in that is that where we built civilization is on the peak of a hill, what are called Milankovitch cycles. It's the reason the temperature has been relatively stable for the last 10,000 years. Have been turning the corner from rising temperatures to falling. So that stability, like the top of the hill, that's why we've been able to build civilization. Without carbon dioxide, we would have plunged down into another ice age, which would have wiped out sedentary civilization.
Whoa. But you're actually saying, without carbon dioxide, full stop.
Yeah, we would have gone down. Instead, we've gone up in the opposite direction at 30 times the speed of a Milankovitch cycle.
Okay, so we are actually on a downward cycle.
We are on the downward. You can see the temperature peaked about, I'm guessing from looking at the data, but I think it's about 4,000 years ago. The temperature peaked.
But it goes very slowly down.
Then it accelerates, because these Milankovitch cycles, you have about 60,000 years of cold temperatures, 6 degrees colder than we are now. Then you have a period of rising and falling temperatures lasting about 40,000 years, 20,000 going up, 20,000 going down. We're on the point of going up and going down. This is what we call the Holocene climate. That's when we built our sedentary civilizations. And if we looked at the temperature and say what we should have done is level off at that point and keep the temperature constant. Not perfectly constant, obviously, but keep the global temperature about 6 degrees above the level of the last ice age. Instead, we're 7.5 degrees and going higher. Wow. And that's what's so dangerous.
So it's the ultimate business.
It's the ultimate business.
Okay, let's do a couple more. I don't know if this is even relevant. Hang on. Growth hackers. You know what that is? People who basically take shortcuts to find. Let's do this one. Financial Conduct Authority. Regulation. What do you feel? What are you on that sort of regulation?
One of the troubles, regulators often get captured, which is one of the issues.
Captured.
So it's bullshit. But if financial regulation worked, the financial crisis wouldn't have happened. Okay? And the reason it happened was because most of them are economists, or most of them accept that economists know what they're talking about, and they ignored the growth in private debt. So if you have the wrong training as a regulator, you're going to not see what's happening. And also, regulators get paid far less than the people they're trying to regulate, and often regulators want to get jobs working in those sectors later for a decent living. I think you've got to set the structure up in a different way. So, for example, one thing I would want to ban would be limited liability for financial corporations. Because with limited liability, if it all goes to hell in a handbasket, you're only partially responsible for the downturn. If you faced a complete responsibility, so you'd lose all your assets if you lend into Ponzi schemes, you're less likely to lend into Ponzi schemes.
You wouldn't take risk, though, would you?
That's one of the troubles. The risks have been useful. So, like, there's a great guy called Richard Vague. If Richard is ever in here, you've got to get him on the show. Richard is a successful banker, a very successful, who's now become a critic of private debt because he saw how that caused the boom and bust in the 2000s. He got out before it happened. Yeah, great guy. So, regulators, the danger is regulators get captured by the same way of thinking as people causing the bubbles.
Do you ever notice that men are quite short-termist, and this is a sexist generalist, and women tend to be thinking longer term? Do you ever see that in economics?
To some extent, but at the same time, like one of the problems about saying promoting women will solve all problems is that what you get instead of male sociopath is a female sociopath.
Yeah.
And I had a brilliant female boss when I was working in the public service. A woman called Anna Booth, still a good friend. Anna was just magnificent to work for and had that long-term perspective. I had a female vice chancellor, and that's all I'm going to say.
Okay, all right. Let's do two more or something. Oligopoly.
Bullshit. Because when you look in the data, and this is why economic theory is so pointless. There's very, very few industries that have anything like an oligopoly or a monopoly or perfect competition. There's what's called a power law distribution of firm sizes. And that competition between small companies to become big companies is what gives us the dynamism of capitalism. The most famous oligopoly was IBM and the Bunch. Remember that at all?
No, I always think of Australian Woolworths and Coles.
Oh, yeah, they definitely dominate the retail trade there. But then Aldi's turned up, and
has it?
Yeah, other companies like that. But IBM used to dominate the computer industry, and there were 5 other companies after them called the Bunch: Burroughs, Unisys, National Control Data, Honeywell, and I've forgotten one of them. Control Data, I think. BUNCH. They're the initials. What's happened to them? They disappeared. Okay? They were seen as an oligopoly. Who are now the dominant companies? Microsoft, Hewlett-Packard, which trivially small companies at the time. So focusing on oligopoly and monopoly is the wrong way to look at problems in capitalism.
Who was considered the oligopoly? The 5 of them were considered.
5, yeah. IBM was the monopolist, and the Bunch were the oligopolies, if you like, yeah.
And they all failed.
They've all failed.
Because they didn't compete well enough.
Well, they tried to. They made plug-compatible devices for IBM. And IBM did anti-competitive behavior of making sure that each new model had to use peripherals which were not compatible from the old machine.
Yeah,
They tried to stymie them. So they were trying to undercut IBM in the peripheral business. In the meantime, they ignored the growth of mini-computer machines, where the VAX, DEC VAX and stuff came from, and the Wang VS, and then you had microcomputers coming along. So they ignored all that stuff, and that's where change in the industry came from.
Right, we're going to finish on this bombshell. Thought leadership.
Unfortunately, that's ended up being bullshit.
You are thought leadership, though, Steve.
I am. I've got to think business. It's actually, let's go business, because thought should lead, not individuals, and not cultish behavior. Yeah. And unfortunately, humans are far too dominated by cultish behavior.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you, Steve. You've been marvelous. Is there anything you want to tell the world? Any final notes?
No, I'll just I'll promote myself. I'm on Patreon.
Ravel's getting launched.
Patreon and Substack are my crowdfunding. Ravel's getting launched in July. Check it out.
We'll put all your links. Thank you. So there you have it. That was this week's episode of Business Without Bullshit. And we'll be back with the quiz, Business or Bullshit, on Thursday. Until then, it's ciao.